mean, we in terms of major sports teams that get a lot of media attention, you talk about the Knicks, the Cowboys, the Yankees, and yet the Celtics, they check all the boxes in terms of prestige, historical players, titles, memorable moments, but I feel like they don't get that respect within that sports spirit. Do you know why that is, or am I off on that?
I think a couple of things have happened. I do think they get it, but it was kind of on hold a little bit because they didn't win a title from '86 until KG and Ray Allen arrived to join Paul Pierce, and 21 years later, in 2008 season, so 22 years later. And then you have the gap from 2008 to last year, 16 years. So that's two titles in what, 40 years. I'm so bad at math, but for a franchise that got 16 pretty quickly, it took a long time for to get them to get that other two.
He is a sports and sports media columnist for the Boston Globe, and he is the editor of the Boston Globe, The Story of the Celtics, which will be available at your local bookstore on October 22nd. We welcome Chad Finn onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Chad.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. Before we delve into the book, we have a tradition on our show. We talk about the latest topics with basketball, but we delve into basketball culture. What makes the game of basketball so great? So take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
Oh boy, my first basketball memory. It's probably watching the Celtics with for some reason JoJo White pops to mind. That's how old I am. On one of the rare NBA games that would be shown on the weekends on CBS back in the late '70s, because everybody knows the kind of history of NBA on TV, where Magic and Bird elevated it, and the the finals in the early '80s were on tape delay. It was a treat when I was growing up, as like a 7, 8 year old, to actually turn on the TV on a weekend and have an NBA game on and see like the Seattle Supersonics or the Washington Bullets, or one of the teams that was really good when I was first getting into loving the league. And so, yeah, probably my first memory actually of just watching basketball was watching JoJo White light it up on a weekend, on a rare Sunday Celtics television appearance.
Can you discuss the creative process of just compiling all of this historic adult data for perhaps probably one of the most prestigious sports franchises that we have, not only in America, perhaps the world? What was this undertaking like? I know you mentioned and we have a similar project with the Boston Red Sox. So just with the Celtics, what was kind of this undertaking like for you?
Yeah, it was familiar this time because I'd done it for a Red Sox book that came out in 2023, same format, telling the history of the franchise through the Globe's coverage through the years. So the Globe's been around since the mid 1800s, and so it was here before the Red Sox, and it was here about 100 years before the Celtics came around in 1946. So the hope is you have everything every significant moment or quirky moment that people might remember. You hope it's been covered and was in the newspaper. And with the Red Sox book, there was never one example of not being able to find something we were looking for. With the Celtics book, it was a little bit more challenging. We did find everything we were looking for, but it was more challenging because the Celtics weren't covered in the way that the Red Sox and Major League Baseball was in those days. It was kind of at least for their first couple of years until Bob Cousy came here and then Bill Russell in 1956, they were an afterthought. People weren't even sure the team was going to survive. And so you got your coverage, but it wasn't, there wasn't a ton of depth at the beginning, those first few years when all of a sudden a dynasty is budding.
Chad, is that primarily due to the status of the league at that time?
Status of the league, I think the market, because it was a hockey community. Walter Brown brought the Celtics here, hoping with the hope that NBA would catch on, but well aware that hockey was where the bread was buttered in this market, and at Boston Garden, which was the home, and they didn't draw initially. and they didn't catch on. The year before Red Auerbach came here, they won 22 games, which is why when Red got here, they had the number one pick in the draft, and everybody here wanted them to take Bob Cousy out of Holy Cross back when college basketball was way bigger than professional basketball. And Red said, no, I'm not doing that. He's too small. I'm not going to make it. And called him a local yokel. And only ended up with Cousy because of a dispersal draft when the Chicago Stags folded. So in those early years, they weren't very good. And even after Red got here, we knew he would become one of the great executives, general managers in professional sports history, but he needed a little bit of luck too. He needed some breaks along the way, and he got one. He got his big one with Cousy. He was the first great guard in NBA history.
And obviously, we know, and I think even most casual basketball fans know the success of that early Celtics dynasty. Was there anything beyond the success that you think factored into the team's growth in standing to the public there?
I think it was Red's ruthlessness to win, which prevented him from doing a lot of terrible things that were pretty common in American culture in those days. He did not care what color his players were, where they were from, what their shape was, how tall they were, just as long as they were going to help him win basketball games. And so that's how you end up with the first black starting five in basketball history, which the Globe, interestingly, didn't really acknowledge other than having it in the box score where you see the five names and the light bulb goes on. Red pursued Bill Russell when he had to make a savvy trade with St. Louis to get the rights to Bill Russell. Well, part of the issue with St. Louis, there were a couple of factors, but one of them was Bill Russell was black, and they weren't sure they wanted a black player of that magnitude when they could make a trade to get a popular white player, which they did with Ed McCauley in that trade. So a lot of factors, went into them becoming a force. I think the biggest one is Red just wanted the best basketball players he could possibly have. And then you look at the 80s where there was a perception, look at the white Celtics because it's Bird, McHale, and Ainge and Bill Walton for that one magical healthy season. But even then, it was just really trying to accumulate the best talent that he could. And, Red's bona fides hiring Bill Russell as the first black coach in league history when he retired in 1966. Red's bona fides of not caring about race and just wanting to win basketball games were pretty well established.
Did Red kind of evolve as things went along? I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, I mean, that desire to win stayed constant. How did he change as a person through all those years running the Celtics?
Yeah, he never really wanted to talk about race. It was interesting. You don't find a lot of that in there. So you can really only look at what his black players said about him, right, to kind of draw the conclusion of how he really was. And there's not a lot of that in the early years. It's more the coverage was pretty strictly basketball in those days. I mean, it would cover when something bad would happen when the black players wouldn't be allowed to eat with their teammates in North Carolina, which was an incident that happened or something like that. It would be in the paper, but mostly the coverage was about basketball. But when Bill Russell died in August 2022 in his obituary in the Globe, there was a quote in there from after he had retired where he was reflecting back on his career, something he'd been hesitant to do for a long time. 10 years later, 1979, he reflected back on his time with Boston and the Celtics, and he described Red as his soulmate and said that they were just on the same wavelength with so many different things, and that Red allowed him to kind of be his own person, to prepare his own way, because he knew in the end Russell would be there. I mean, you're 21-0 in Game 7s in your life. Of course, you're going to be there, and you deserve that trust. But to read that Bill Russell thought of Red Auerbach as his soulmate, and he wasn't purely talking about basketball, he was talking about the way that he went about life. I think that says all you need to know.
Chad, I want to shift gears in terms of the writers in this book. It's like a who's who of really talented journalists throughout the history of just American journalism. Bob Ryan, Michael Hawley, Jacob McMullen. It is incredible. What attracts those writers to the Boston Globe specifically? Because you look through the book, it's a who's who of who I was growing up just not only reading but just watching on national media.
Yeah, well, it was the destination then. Major metropolitan dailies were where you went to. It was your pinnacle as a sports writer. You wanted to be out there. New York Times, the Boston Globe, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, whatever. That changed with television, which kind of ironically, Will McDonough, who is in this book, he's known as a football writer, but he's got a Celtic story about Auerbach and Bird in this book. He was the first sports writer on TV when he was part of NBC's NFL studio programming in the 80s, and it blew that door open. And so all of a sudden the destination became, well, I'm this really successful newspaper writer. Now I can go be on TV. Bob Ryan left the Globe in the 80s to be a local sports reporter on television for a while, and came back, but he even gave that a shot, and the money's obviously greater. So that kind of changed in the 80s, but back in the heyday of all of this, I think probably was the mid 80s, where you had this incredible Celtics team. Celtics fans will tell you the 86 team is the best of all time because Walton was healthy and the starting five that they had. And then you had this group of reporters covering the team who just were on top of their games as writers. It was Bob Ryan, it was Jackie, as you mentioned, Lee Montville, who Globe writers will tell you is the best writer, inimitable writer at the paper. The hardest thing I had to do for this book was when two of these people wrote the same topic, trying to decide which one to choose, because you can't pick like three great stories on Game 4 of the 1985 finals. You got to pick one. And so that chapter about the big three and Bird ended up being the biggest one in the book by far, because not but just because of that team, but because of the quality of the work of the people who were covering at that point in time.
Go ahead, Matt.
Chad, just curious if there was anything in particular that stands out, and maybe there's more than one thing, certainly, but anything in particular that surprised you as you were compiling everything that's included in this book and doing your research. Was there a lot that you didn't know that you learned? Was there something that jumped out and surprised you in working on this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably learned the most about the mid 70s teams because they're the 70s teams because they're sandwiched between the Russell dynasty and then the Bird and the Big Three era, and those are the ones that get celebrated, understandably. But 74 Celtics won the title. 76 Celtics won the title. They had great players. I mentioned JoJo White being my first favorite, and Dave Cowens, John Havlicek, who's still all over the all-time leaderboards in basketball history. He tends to get overlooked, and you watch him in an old NBA TV game, you say, oh, that guy's dribbling around with his back to the basket. But he was a fantastic player who could run all day, and they could have won more than 2 titles. He got hurt in 73 for a 68-win team that probably would have won it all if he hadn't separated his shoulder against the Knicks. So just digging in and reading, Bob Ryan was the writer then, the main beat guy, and he would write like 3 incredible features on Dave Cowens during one season just because Bob was so prolific that I really learned a lot about those 70s teams that I had cursory knowledge of, but I just didn't recognize the depth of how good they really were.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating time. I mean, the 70s in the NBA, and of course you have like the pre-merger time. I mean, do you think that's kind of like sort of a microcosm of the league at large? It's kind of somewhat maybe of a dark ages in the coverage of the league?
I think so, which is kind of too bad because, I mean, the ABA was cooler, right? And the merger brought a lot more excitement, flair to the NBA. I mean, the ABA had the three-point line. Dr. J was in that league. David Thompson, some great big guys like Dan Issel and Artis Gilmore. I mean, the talent level of the NBA just exploded, and you had some more diversely skilled players after the ABA came in, and I feel like it really gave the NBA a leap forward, but it took a while for people to recognize that, for fans to recognize it, for TV executives to recognize it. And you're in that cocaine era where a lot of guys burned out, talented players just suddenly faded away, and you found out later there was a problem. And yeah, the pinnacle was the finals, Lakers Sixers finals being on like at 11:30 at night on tape delay. Because the interest just wasn't there. It's unfathomable now, but the interest wasn't there. And Bird Magic changed that and elevated it. But I've always thought the NBA should have been elevated a little bit sooner than that if people are just paying attention. When Dr. J's suddenly with the Sixers and no longer in the ABA, and the league gets that big boost in talent from the merger. Felt like it should have caught on a little bit then.
With the Celtics, do you think they're an underrated franchise in just the world of sports? I mean, in terms of major sports teams that get a lot of media attention, you talk about the Knicks, the Cowboys, the Yankees, and yet the Celtics, they check all the boxes in terms of prestige, historical players, titles, memorable moments, but I feel like they don't get that respect within that sports spirit. Do you know why that is, or am I off on that?
I think a couple of things have happened. I do think they get it, but it was kind of on hold a little bit because they didn't win a title from '86 until KG and Ray Allen arrived to join Paul Pierce, and 21 years later, in 2008 season, so 22 years later. And then you have the gap from 2008 to last year, 16 years. So that's 2 titles in 40 years? I'm so bad at math, but for a franchise that got 16 pretty quickly, it took a long time for them to get that other 2. And meanwhile, the Lakers caught up to them. You saw other dynasties emerge, whether it was the Jordan Bulls in the 90s, the Golden State recently. And so the Celtics, I think just in the whole context of the NBA, got put on the back burner a little bit. They were always good. I mean, the KG Pierce, Rondo, Ray Allen teams, Danny Ainge kept them together for 6 years before he blew it up. And even in 2012, they were up 3-2 on LeBron, and before LeBron flipped the switch and said no more of this. Then it took a while for the Tatum and Brown group that they have now to grow into who they became. So I think people are recognizing again, if they ever kind of forgot about the Celtics, they're looking at them now and saying, "Oh yeah, they're really good right now," and that's an awful lot of banners they've got hanging in their rafters.
My dad, he's from Boston, was raised in Malden, Massachusetts, and I was talking to him about this interview, and he said that, he's a casual sports fan. He mentioned that in his mind, he didn't want to generalize, but in his mind, the Celtics were the 3rd most important team within Boston. It kind of shocked me. Is that the feeling with the rest of the city of Boston, or is that just individual to just the fan within the city, you think?
Well, it's funny because last year they actually had lower TV ratings than the Bruins did.
Wow.
Not by a big number, but if the Bruins and Celtics are playing on the same night, the Bruins are probably going to get a little bit better viewership. And, the Bruins are coming off a season where they set all kinds of regular season NHL records for dominance before falling out in the first round of the playoffs the year before. So there was a lot of buzz coming into the year. But I thought, as a basketball person, more than anything else, I thought it was really clear that the Celtics had a chance to be special last year because they'd gotten so close in 22. They nearly came back from being down 3-0 to Miami in the East Finals in 23. And the next step felt like getting the right pieces on the roster to fit with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. They did with Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and it was time to move on from Marcus Smart. And it clicked. I mean, they were dominant, and there was some skepticism about whether they would get over the hump, but that was a team that I thought watching them over the course of the season had a real chance to be special and were showing that they were going to be. And I was surprised it didn't catch on along the way more than it did. Now, by the end, it was Celtics Town. The parade when they won, it was incredible because the players will tell you it was the most diverse group of Bostonians they've ever seen. Everybody was there. And it felt like just a great moment. But, we'll see how sustainable it is going into this year. The Red Sox are way on the back burner. They stink, and the Patriots are in a rebuilding phase. And it was never a football town before Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. So it's Bruins Celtics here, I think, vying to be number one this year.
Let's talk about the modern Celtics, if you don't mind. Let's continue with that.
Sure.
It's really cool, I think, and speaking as someone who tends to root for greatness, I like seeing that narrative build and that core group kind of get the job done, so to speak. So after Brown and Tatum being together all these years, really cool to see them win a title, just as a sports fan in general. Moving forward, do you think this team has the kind of makeup and has the drive? Because there are different motivations, right, for that next level of greatness, which would be repeating with that championship. Do you think this team has everything that they need, the tangibles, the intangibles, to be able to push for that? I mean, of course, you've got to have good luck, good health, all those things play a huge role too. But do you think they're built to potentially be in that contention for the next several years?
Well, there are a couple of factors. I mean, you mentioned health. That's the big one, and nobody ever really wants to talk about that because sports radio and those debate shows will just say it's an excuse, but it's in reality. You have an injury, it can ruin the best laid plans. They got fortunate with that last year. They were healthy other than Porzingis being in and out of the lineup, and I think they went 21-4 when he was injured during the regular season. So by the time the playoffs came around, they were used to playing without him, and they were used to winning without him when he was out of the lineup. If you tell me Jalen and Jason and Drew Holiday will be 35 in June, and Derek White, who's emerged into just the ultimate glue guy, those guys all stay healthy. Al Horford doesn't regress at age 38. I'd say they're right there in the mix at the end and have a great chance to repeat, but you just don't know if they'll be healthy. In terms of the mental makeup of this team, it's pretty extraordinary. We were talking about taking that next step and the things that have to happen to go from being a contender to actually being a championship. It's not a step, it's a leap. One of the things that happened last year was that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum trusted their teammates. And that wasn't always the case in the past. And honestly, it probably shouldn't have been the case in the past. I loved Marcus Smart when he was here, but the ball found him in big moments a lot. And I think Jalen and Jason both thought that if we take them taking a bad shot is better than Marcus taking a 20-footer with a second and a half on the shot clock. And so they tended to force things. And all of a sudden, last year, they're playing with Porzingis, who thrilled to be here. Guy's got a grin on his face all the time, and it's just the ultimate bailout outlet. If you're having a hard time getting something going, give it to him and let him shoot a 15-footer over whoever's guarding him. You have Drew Holiday and Derek White, and there are 5 guys in the league like them where they're so malleable. They can do anything and are willing to do anything you need them to do to be a winning team. Jaylen Brown knows that if he passes the ball to Drew Holiday, there's a great chance it's coming back to him. Jason Tatum knows Derek White is always going to make the smart play 99.9% of the time. And so that trust was one of those last pieces that elevated them. And I don't think that goes anywhere this year. I don't think they're going to have that disease of more that people talk about where all of a sudden Jalen wants to score 35 points a game or something. I think they're locked into winning and just winning.
Chad, I want to ask you about your recent appearance on Richard Deitch's podcast. A great conversation you had with him. And one of the things that stood out was about the WNBA. And during our conversation, I think it's popped in my mind. You mentioned just the inflection point of the NBA in the 80s. And I feel we're in a similar spot with the WNBA now with Caitlin Clark and within the incoming kind of freshman class with the WNBA in 2025. Where do you see that league going just in terms of popularity? Is she kind of that catalyst that will you see that ascension in terms of a league, or do you see there's other pain points that might prevent them from having that growth compared to what the NBA experienced in the late 80s and 90s?
Yeah, what she did this year, and to a lesser degree, Angel Reese, was
Yeah.
pretty similar to Magic and Bird or Jordan's ascent a few years after Magic and Bird, that 84, 85, 86 stretch. Well, I guess he was hurt in 85, but just elevating everything around them. I think the league is benefiting hugely from this, and you see it in the ratings, and the ratings are still very good when Caitlin Clark's not involved, but they're extraordinary when she is. They have to figure out how to maximize this because they make it difficult on themselves sometimes. The media access with the WNBA, you think they would be saying yes to everything, and they don't. They can be kind of uncooperative or unresponsive when you're trying to get a one-on. Not Caitlin Clark, who's got incredible demands on her, but just a player that maybe is getting more attention now than she did last season or did earlier in her career. And the Christine Brennan controversy, with her asking questions over for a book, and they felt like she was being too pushy. You just got to kind of brush that stuff off. I see Jalen, Jason deal with those sorts of things every day here. Do you guys like each other? Can you play together? They dealt with that for 7 years. I think the WNBA needs to acclimate a little bit more to the spotlight that they have now before, it dims on them a little bit. But the talent coming in the league's just going to get better and better. And people anticipate Paige Beckers and other players coming in too. And I hope the league embraces it more than they have, rather than kind of getting in their own way sometimes.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's something that we've covered on our show, just in terms of media access for reporters. That's been a pain point, and maximizing the coverage for the league. And it's tough because I feel like I totally agree with you, but at the same time, I feel like the amount of hatred and vitriol that they get, I think, is very abnormal compared to other leagues. So I think there is kind of a balancing act where you can give more media access, but at the same time be considerate of the players. So I think that's where I think there's a difference compared to the NBA. But I agree with you. I think that is a pain point. I've heard other reporters state the same things, that they have their positive intentions for this league to succeed, and yet there's some push-pull with that.
Yeah, positive intentions is a good way to put it. I think they need to recognize when that's what you're after, and you're trying to, you recognize that these players are more known now, and they're getting amplified, and you want to be able to tell those stories, and to have barriers in the way to do that isn't helping the league. But of course, these women are dealing with some just insanely cruel and unfair stuff at a lot of different turns. Whether it's the racism from people who claim they're Caitlin Clark fans, but really just want to, be cruel and racist to the black players in the league, which it seems like there's been a lot of that. And I can understand sensitivity from the league as a whole about wanting to protect their players in that regard as much as they can. But, when some media trying to, bring a little bit of a spotlight to people that maybe haven't had it until this moment in time where the league is reaching this pinnacle of popularity that they haven't seen before, they need to do a better job of sorting out maybe who's on their side and who isn't.
Yep, totally agree. Chad, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, again, where they can find the book and any other projects you're working on in the future as well?
Yeah, I'm at Globe Chad Finn on still Twitter to me. And it's probably the one I use the most. I'm on Instagram too at Chad Finn Globe, but don't go on there all that much. But no other book projects in the works now. We just got to hopefully this one sells well enough that we get more opportunities.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, Chad. Much appreciated.
Okay, thanks, guys. That was a lot of fun.